I would like to introduce a very special friend to the California gaming industry, Mr. Tom Parks. He is one of the owners, or he was one of the owners of the Horseshoe and the Gardena Club, and he was the very first president of the former California Card Club Association, which is now the GSGA. So that's pretty special too. He was a friend of my grandfather's. They were actually neighbors because the Horseshoe Club is just located across the street from the Normandy. And I've heard some really great stories. Hopefully we'll be enlightened by some of those when Mr. Parks speaks. He started out as a public relations director, and along with others, he waged a campaign against a proposition that was to outlaw all card clubs in LA County. So thank goodness that didn't go through, or we would not be here today. With that, we are not the only ones to put him on a Wall of Fame. He's actually already on 3 other walls, as well as being named Citizen of the Year and Executive of the Year. So this is just another to add to the long list. But I'd like to, with that, introduce Mr. Tom Parks.
Thank you very much. I don't deserve this. Of course, I have psoriasis, and I don't deserve that either. I'm not very good at public speaking, and that's why I joined Toastmaster Club. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Toastmasters, but it's a club that helps you improve your public speaking. And one of the things they have is table topics. And that's where they call on you to give an extemporaneous speech. And one day they called on me to give an extemporaneous speech. And the only thing I could think of to talk about was sex. So I talked about sex for 5 minutes. And surprisingly, I won a trophy. So I got home that evening, and my wife saw the trophy, and she said, yeah, you must have done good. And I said, yeah. She said, what'd you talk about? Now, I didn't want to go into any long discussion of why I selected sex, you know. So I told her I talked about sailing. As luck would have it, the next day she ran into the president of the club at the grocery store, and he said, Connie, Tom gave a good speech yesterday. She said, yeah, I know it. I don't understand it. He knows nothing about the subject. He's only tried it twice. The first time he got sick. The second time his hat flew off. I was elected the first president of the California Card Club Owners Association in 1982. Our first meeting, I believe, was at Caesar's Tahoe. Steve Miller was there, and a few others I'm sure were there. I didn't accomplish a lot, and one of my big accomplishments was introducing Dick Floyd to the membership. He was an assemblyman, and he asked me if there was somehow that he could get involved with the card clubs, and I invited him to that convention, and he attended and went on from there. And the second thing is I had a one-on-one meeting with the Attorney General at that time, who was Vandekamp, an attempt to lift some of the restrictions on the games that we were allowed to play. Whether that went any place or not, I don't know. That's been 50 years exactly that I went into the card club business in 1958, and I became public relations director for the Horseshoe and the Gardena clubs. And my first job was to wage a campaign against a 7th card club in Gardena. We had 6 clubs at that time, and Ernie Prim, who had the Rainbow and the Monterey clubs, he wanted to build another club called the Starlight Club, and he, along with his partner Joe Hall. And we waged a campaign, and we finally won out. And then there was some lawsuits in an attempt to outlaw all of the card clubs in Los Angeles County, which of course at that time was only Gardena. And so we filed lawsuits against the county and so forth. And my job was to visit all of the clubs that I could in the state of California and obtain ordinances and pictures of the clubs and so forth to present as evidence in the lawsuit. At that time, there was supposed to be 400 clubs in California. I don't know if that was true or not, but I went to a lot of clubs. Pittsburgh, Martinez, Emeryville, Hope, San Ramon, San Paulo, San Diego, South San Francisco, all over the place, which gave me a good opportunity to get acquainted with the card club industry. The Gardena Club was an unusual club in that it catered to mostly elderly people. Our biggest paychecks were right after Social Security checks came out. And we had some interesting characters there. We had Loose Frank, who played lowball. And every time he got a wheel, he'd pass out blue chip stamps to all the players. And it was 9 o'clock Joe, who showed up at 9 o'clock every morning and left exactly at noon. And when he didn't show up one day, we knew he was dead. There was Dirty Mouth Paula. She had language worse than any Teamster you've ever heard, I tell you. And Sitting Bull. She would come into a game and sit there hour after hour after hour, and you wondered how she could ever go to the bathroom and to go to the kidneys and so forth. And then we had some famous players like Jack Rollins, who rode Frosty the Snowman. He was a regular. And Henry Buchalter, his father was Lepke Buchalter, head of Murder Incorporated. We had Sid Marks, who was our head guard, was a former middleweight boxing champion in Canada in the early 30s. And he moved to Hollywood and became a bodyguard for Mae West. And he knew a lot of the old boxing champions. In fact, during World War II, he and Joe Louis put on camps to teach hand-to-hand boxing, hand-to-hand fighting with the troops. And he was a good friend of George Allen and Gracie, George Burns and Gracie Allen. And he wrote the Newspaper Boys Hall of Fame, which was where people like President Eisenhower and Johnson were newspaper boys when they were kids, and captains of industry and movie stars and so forth. And he wrote a book about that and sent his collection to the Valley Forge Freedom Foundation, which is on view today. We had some funny incidents at the Gardena Club. We had one night, one of our managers went up on the catwalk suspecting a cheat, and he was looking over the table, and he slipped and fell, and his foot went through the ceiling and dangled above the table, and the cheat left. We had another one where the armed robber came in, held up our cashier's cage, and foolishly enough, a board man chased him out of the club and tackled him on the sidewalk outside. And the gun went off and blew the robber's thumb off. And the money scattered all over the place, and the players came out to see what was going on. And needless to say, we never recovered any of the money. But the Horseshoe was a different animal. It was a younger crowd and more affluent. We had people like Bill Roberts, who was a partner with Stu Spencer, and they handled the campaigns for Ronald Reagan for governor and president. And we had John Holmes, who was famous for other things in the porno world. Later died of AIDS. And we had Ruth Handler, who was the founder of Mattel's. She came in a couple of times a week in her Rolls Royce, and was a good player. One night, Gabe Kaplan, the actor, came in, and he wanted to cash a $10,000 paycheck, and the cashier turned him down and said, "You don't have a card in the window. I can't cash it." So he went down the street to George Anthony's place, and George cashed it, and he became a regular customer. Now, I didn't fire the gal because she was following policy. We had some trouble with cheats there at the Horseshoe Club from time to time. We had this one guy that was, he came in all the time, using different disguises and so forth, and they caught him enough times, but one time he came in dressed as disguised as a woman, and he made the mistake of having a holdout machine. And they caught him, and this time they sent him to jail. And they kept his machine, and he had the nerve enough to call and ask if he could get his machine back. And then we had some guys that played partners in the 5 and 10 lowball game. And John Lockheed, who was manager of the operator of the Monterey Club, had come across the schedule that these guys had made up, stipulating what signals they were going to use and so forth, and when they were going to meet after the game, and split up the money and so forth. And so we barred them. There was 3 of them, and they, like I say, they were playing 5 and 10 low. We barred them. They sued us, and the damn insurance company settled with them because they sued us for violating their civil rights. And they were allowed to come back in the club. A couple of them didn't show up anymore, but the one guy did. So one night I went in, and I saw him sitting at the game, and I let the players at the table know who they were playing with. That was the last I saw of him. Well, I probably shouldn't have done that. I probably should have gotten in trouble, but I couldn't help it. And the ironic thing is, all the clubs had gotten together because George Anthony had a knack at getting people together, and we had promoted a thing where we're going to give away a brand new Chrysler car in the drawing, and we had all the tickets, all the clubs selling the tickets and so forth. And one of the guys that we barred wanted the goddamn car. That really ticked me off. We had some union problems too at the Horseshoe Club. Well, all the clubs. The culinary union struck us, went on strike, and it lasted for about a week and a half. I remember at the Normandy Club, Russ Miller had met his wife Mary when she was a chip girl back in the 40s. And during the strike, when Mary put on the apron, and she was out there on the floor and working as a chip girl, and we had most of our managers working as floormen and so forth. That lasted for about a week and a half, and we sent coffee and donuts out to the picketing strikers and so forth until it was over. And then we had a couple of bomb threats. One, they found a device in the men's room one Sunday morning. We had to evacuate the club, and that was kind of scary. And then I became I was elected the general partner of the Rainbow Club, and the Rainbow Club was faltering. The Monterey Club had closed, and they had the same general partners. It was a different limited partnership, but they had the same general partners. And the Rainbow Club was paying off the Monterey Club's debts. So I knew when I took it over that it was faltering and it was in bad shape. But I had the ego enough where I thought maybe I could turn it around and make things different. It didn't happen. And we had to close it down in the middle of the night in the summer of 1983. And one thing I remember about my co-honoree, George Anthony, was we had a lot of customers with outstanding chips out there, and none of the clubs would honor their chips, take them, except George Anthony. He took them because George knew that those people that cashed their chips at his club would probably stay and play, and they did, and they became customers. And George was smart that way. The clubs really in Gardena really had a tough time when the Bell Club first opened, and I think that was in 1980, I think, something like that. Because we were restricted, we could only have $20 limit games. We were only allowed 35 tables. We couldn't have liquor on the premises. None of those things. And then the Bell Club opened, they could do just about anything they wanted. And the customers flocked, left us. And I could understand why. We treated them like, like a bunch of cattle before, because we had our own way. There was no place else to go. And then the Bicycle Club opened, and that made things even worse in Gardena. So the Monterey Club closed. The Andy Cicino sold the Gardena Club to the Kaiser Foundation. The Horseshoe Club closed. The El Dorado Club eventually closed and became the Hustler. And the only one that really survived was Russ Miller's Normandy Club, being a family-operated organization, so forth. And he had the wherewithal to hold it together and to survive. There were great memories. And I'm very happy that you allowed me to share these with you tonight. My friend, my co-honoree, George Anthony, who's deceased, I can tell you a little bit about him. He was in the refrigeration business when he took over the El Dorado. There was a couple of partners. The Embassy Club, it was originally the Embassy Club, and it went bankrupt. And there was a couple of guys, I can't think of the name. One of them was Warren Blank, I can't think of the other fellow's name. They took it over and they built the El Dorado, and then they left, and then George Anthony came in. And George was originally an inventor, and he had a refrigeration business in Inglewood. He had quite a few patents and so forth. And he took over the El Dorado and was very successful in the operation. And he had a knack of bringing people together and doing things. The clubs were always fighting each other and could never agree on anything. And he got us together in promotion, advertising as a group and so forth. George was responsible for that. And I can remember some of the meetings we had in his conference room, and in attendance would be Ernie Prim, who was the godfather of the card clubs at Gardena, and Russ Miller from the Normandy Club, John Lockheed from the Monterey Club, Dave Lilly from the Rainbow Club, George Anthony from the El Dorado, myself and Bev Blair and our attorney Al Perlson. And we were all there, and George was able to pull that off. That was a tough thing. They're all gone now. I'm here. But I want to once again thank you for allowing me to share these memories, and thank you for this award. Thank you.
He was talking about public speaking. That was perfect. Okay, well, thank you again, and those are our 2 inductees for the Hall of Fame.